On today's show, Michael Porter Jr.'s all-star level play is drawing interest on the trade market and dividing the Nets fan base as to whether they should hold him and compete or cash in on his value and push for a top draft pick. Which direction should Brooklyn go, and how could the NBA address its tanking problem? I'll dive into that with Frank Isola on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the number one sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's episode, I got Frank Isola joining the show. We're going to talk about Michael Porter Jr.'s hot start, how that can affect the next tank versus play-in debate, whether the team will consider a trade for him. We'll also get into the NBA as a whole. How can they address their tanking problem before we close it out with some talk about Egor, Demin, and Cam Thomas and both their situations. Let's go. All right, we got Frank Isola here now, and we got a lot to talk about. At the top, we're going to focus some on Michael Porter Jr.'s breakout and the Nets fan base and their play-in versus tank debate that has erupted as of late. We'll also get into how can the NBA fix the tanking issue before closing it out with some discussion about the Nets rookies and possibly Cam Thomas. But Frank, I want to talk about MPJ at the top because MPJ has kind of become symbolic of the divide between this Nets fan base early this season. You know, he's been far and away the driving force behind their ability to compete, to exceed some early expectations for the second straight season. And with that, there's been a debate amongst the Nets fan base of should the Nets be trying to win and push for the play-in? Should they be prioritizing trading? Should they be prioritizing tanking more? And in turn, should they trade MPJ? Should they keep MPJ? But, since the Nets 0-7 start, MPJ has been playing like a bona fide all-star. I mean, he's at 27 points, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 50, 43, 83 shooting splits over his last 21 games. And most impressively, the Nets are 11-10 during that span. So they're with him in the lineup. So they're playing competitive basketball. So when you look at MPJ, all the games you're covering, what he's been doing, what has surprised you most about this start and how he's kind of been able to maintain his efficiency while scaling up into this number one option role?
Yeah, number one, he's a lot better than I thought he was. I know he was a good player in Denver. Obviously helped them win a championship. I gave him a lot of credit for last year playing with a bum shoulder when he easily could have said, listen, I'm under contract for a couple more years. I'm not going to play through it. So he wasn't nearly 100%, and he still was effective. And that's always the mark of really good players, when they're willing to play with an injury where they know they're not going to be at their best. The first game of the season, the Nets played Charlotte, and it was a disaster. And they lost that game. And the whole time I'm thinking, man, it's going to be like, who's the leader of the team? They really miss a guy like Dennis Schroeder, who was a leader. Even Cam Johnson toward the end of last season became that guy. Then they had that terrible performance against Houston on the road in late October where they gave up 71 points in the first half. I think it was 133 for the game. And I said, wait, this is going to be a lot worse than I even thought. And remember, even at the time, a lot of people are floating out the idea, could they be the worst record of all time? Could they challenge that 76er team that only won 9 games? And then something happened with Michael Porter Jr. I think that Jordy Fernandez got to him somehow and convinced him what this year could mean for him, the way he's perceived around the league. It's not just that he's played really well. I think he's taken on more of a leadership role. And Erik, you see it, like when he's out of games and he's on the sidelines, he's very much engaged. And you could say, what's the big deal about that? On a team like this, I think it means a lot. He's the most accomplished player on the team. He's played in the most playoff games on the team. He's been really, really good. And I look around the East and I look at teams like Detroit, like how much would he help them with his shooting ability? How much would he help a team like Miami? I think that his stock has really gone up since he's played. Obviously, he did well in Denver. He won a championship again, but I think he's just perceived a little bit differently with the way that he's played here in Brooklyn.
For sure. And, what you said about the leadership, I mean, I don't remember which game it was. It might have been the Houston game, but I came on this podcast and I said that you look at the top two guys on the team, at least in terms of shots and usage, and it was Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Thomas at the beginning of the season. And I came on here and I said neither of those guys is doing anything to lead this team. And it just looks like they have no structure whatsoever. And then they hit a point where MPJ made those comments to me and some other reporters. I think they were 0-7 at the time, or 0-5 or something. 0-5, I think it was. And he said, we have a lot of rookies at point guards. We're struggling in that way. And it seemed like that was kind of a message to Jordi Fernandez from MPJ. And it seems like Jordi Fernandez kind of met him halfway there. They started starting Tyrese Martin after that. They sent Ben Saraff down to the G League, and they started having some more success. Cam Thomas also went out of the lineup, so that kind of changed things. Noah Clowney came in. But it seems like there was a little give and take between Michael Porter Jr. and maybe some of the other veterans in that in the locker room there and Jordi Fernandez with how they were going to, handle that. And with that, Michael Porter Jr., like you said, he's kind of got this reputation around the league. I talked to some people around the league, lately about what is his trade stock. And some people say it's really high. And some people will come at you and say, well, he's a knucklehead. He says all these other things, teams don't know about that stuff. But I'm with you in terms of he's been a leader for this Nets team as of late. And the way that he's played, with him supporting some of the guys when he's off the court, but on the court, he takes some crazy shots. He makes a lot of them, sure. That might not always be the best process. But outside of that, I've been really impressed with him playing the right way. I think he pretty consistently makes the right play. I think he's been a much better passer in this system. I think he gets the ball where it needs to go. And the gravity that he's providing, it's, creating a lot of open shots for the rest of these Nets guys. If I were a Nets teammate of Michael Porter Jr. right now, I would love playing with him because he's off the ball and he, gets a lot of open shots for these other guys.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at what happened in that Denver game, and we all knew he was going to play in that game. He was held out of the first two games of January because of, they said he was banged up or he was sick, whatever the case may be. But you knew he was going to play against his former team. And I thought going into the game for a second, I thought, you know what, he's going to try to score 40 to 50 points to really stick it to the Denver Nuggets. But he didn't even have that kind of game. I know he drew a lot of fouls, so that took away from some of the shots, but he only took 17 shots. So it wasn't as if he went out there and figured, I'm going to shoot the ball 30 times. What were the other things he does? He rebounded the ball in that game. He had 11, and he had 5 assists. I thought he played a solid all-around game, and he didn't make it all about himself. I think, of course, the media, we're going to do that. It's him going up against Denver. I get that. And all the, even the questions to the other players is slanted in that direction. But I didn't really feel like he made it. This is a referendum on the Denver Nuggets in that trade. I will show them how great of a player I am. I didn't think that he did that. And to me, that said a lot about him. And also his attitude. So you're on a Denver team that's a championship contender. You've already won a title. You've played with one of the greatest players in the history of the sport, Nikola Jokic. I don't ever felt like he's come here with this air about him. I can't believe, look at what I'm supposed to play with. Who are these guys? This is kind of beneath me. When I was on Denver, I did this and I did that. To me, he's kind of embraced the role as being like the elder statesman of the team, being the veteran that they need to be the leader. And that's why I think if you wipe away those first few games, and I think, maybe some of the lineups didn't work. Obviously starting Ben Saraff, the rookie, was a mistake. Those first 5 games, I think, whatever Jordi Fernandez did and however Michael Porter Jr. took it and responded to it, that's what's really changed the next season. They went from being, those first few games where they were getting blown out, it was like, what the heck are you, for you guys, what are you going to talk about? What are you going to write about? I'm thinking, what are we going to talk about every game? All you wanted was them to be competitive. I kept saying after the games, all right, at this point, you're not even worried about the results. You're just worried about the performance, and the performance hasn't been good enough. It's not like you're losing by 3. You're losing by 30 points, 20 points. You're losing to some bad teams as well. And I think the big part of the turnaround, I think it's been the head coach, but certainly the best player. Eric, what's their record when he doesn't play? I don't think they've won a game yet.
They haven't won a game, and they've lost to several, with
Washington.
Versus sub 500 teams without MPJ in the lineup. They're 0-5, and their net rating swing with him against those teams versus without, it's 20 points. It's something insane like that. So, and it's because you said all you want is for them to be competitive. And that was true, especially for me, somebody who has to talk about this team literally every day on this show. But it's swung now to the point where, are they too good? Are they too competitive? And that, it's like that. That's just how it goes with this Nets team. And there's become a fan divide of, are the Nets winning too much? Should they be more aggressive in how they're tanking? And MPJ obviously is at the center of that, because you saw it. They take him out of the lineup for that back-to-back at the start of January, and they completely fall off a cliff. Granted, they had some other guys out in that Wizards game. They played a good team against Houston in the first game. But then he comes back, and they're back to looking like a competent, competitive team. So their ability to compete it doesn't solely rest on MPJ's shoulders, but he's playing the biggest role in it. And, I get Nets fans now who are, I talk about the draft lottery. I think that's obviously a huge storyline with the team this year. A lot of people would argue it was, 1A, rookies 1B, like interchangeable entering the season. And some fans are, kind of getting into hysteria about they're winning too many games. Some fans will email me, reply on the show, say, you're talking about tanking too much. They should go for the play-in. Tanking's for losers. And I've kind of been of the mindset that I don't think it's the most prudent thing for them to go and try to do everything they can to be like a 32-win team and kind of put themselves not in the best draft lottery position. I see there are benefits to that, like the culture. You can sell that to some free agents. Like look at the success that we've had here. But I also think that it would be tough to trade back, to trade those 3 or 4 picks that they traded to get their 2 first-round picks back last year and this year with all the talent at the top of these drafts and miss out on that 2 years in a row. So what's your opinion on that? Because it's really become a debate amongst Nets fan base.
Well, I think the biggest roadblock with tanking is the head coach of the team. I think he's a very competitive guy, and to me, he does the right thing. He's trying to win all the time. Now, we'll see what happens in January and then once they get past the trade deadline, if Michael Porter Jr. is still on the team, how they use him. Will he play in a back-to-back the rest of the season? Probably not, and they could always use the idea of the injury history that he's had and the back issues that he's had. The team that tanked successfully last year was Philadelphia because they moved up in the draft and they got VJ Edgecombe. The Dallas Mavericks weren't trying to tank. They fell into the lottery and they ended up getting the number 1 pick. So I think the way things shake up right now, it looks like the Nets will probably be in the lottery. I'm not trying to lose on purpose. I think it's a big mistake. I think when you have a young team like this, you're trying to build a culture. And I think, when you're a losing team, that becomes a habit. If you become a winning team, I think that's habit forming as well. And just look at the progress of the young guys. I mean, Nolan Traore looked like he didn't belong on the court. The times that he played early on, the rookies are contributing. They're going to be up and down. I'm not doing that. I'm just not. I think it's a loser way to approach it. They'll probably end up in the lottery anyway. And then a lot of time, the luck of the balls. I mean, Chicago defied the odds with Derrick Rose, I believe. Cleveland's done it before. I think it was the year that they got Kyrie Irving. So there's no guarantee, and there's really right now there's no surefire number 1 pick. So I don't know. Everyone seems to think that the draft is pretty deep, and if you get a high pick, you're going to be okay. I'm not tanking. I don't agree with it.
So you're anti-tank like altogether, like
well, in April that could change. But right now, I'm not doing that. I don't agree with it. I think it sends a bad message, just like the message. And I know you were debating this with the fans as well at the start of the season. Just play the rookies, play the rookies. That's not how it works. They'll just roll the ball out and say, well, you were drafted in the first round. You're going to play. You're getting crushed in practice by other guys, but I don't really care about them. I'm going to lose those guys in October, November because you should play. It's not the way it works. And I think the way that Jordy's brought the players along has been the right thing to do. And you're seeing they're getting contributions to them. I'm not losing on purpose. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, and it almost enters a conversation of like they don't even have to try to lose on purpose for tanking because
exactly
MPJ is the biggest factor in them winning right now. And if they trade MPJ, even though Jordy Fernandez is this great coach and maybe he could prove me wrong, I think they're going to have a very hard time winning if they trade MPJ. And the decision of whether to trade MPJ or not trade MPJ, that's, a tank, like that's, could be part of the tanking, could factor into that equation. But that also could just be like, where are they at with the timeline? And, how do they think this is the best time to trade MPJ? So how could the Nets be viewing that? And what should fans be looking for as we get closer to the trade deadline? We'll get into that. We'll also get into some of the NBA and how can they try to fix tanking. We'll get into that after a quick break. Guys, Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new: boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect, right before the games start and right before the weekend start. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Guys, I love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, coming back from the break, got Frank Isola here on the show. And last thing about Michael Porter Jr., Frank, you said you're anti-tanking. And, there's a conversation. Should the Nets try to be tanking? Should they be trying to win? And if they trade MPJ, that could really, they could still try to win, in my opinion, and they'll probably lose a lot more games than they are right now, where I think they definitely will, because the whole offense has been crafted around MPJ, and they don't have another engine like that on this team. Could Jordi Fernandez be a complete miracle worker and work that out? Sure. But, the MPJ conversation, and that's not just a tanking thing. There's a legitimate argument of, should they be selling high on MPJ right now? And you brought up, Detroit and some of the other teams. Jake Fisher, Mark Stein have put out reports over the last week about all the teams that are going to have interest in MPJ. Detroit, Golden State. The Bulls, got into that conversation. Obviously, Milwaukee, with how desperate they are. So it's an interesting conversation to me. My view has been on it. If the Nets can get what they deem to be a good offer for MPJ, and that's probably a good first-round pick, maybe something else draft compensation-wise, a big expiring contract that turns into more cap space this summer, I think they have to strongly consider it, just for the fact that MPJ's injury history, that really worries me. Also, also the timelines, them matching up. Because if you hold until the summer, you probably have to lock him into an extension. And that extension is probably going to come in $35, maybe $40 million annually for multiple years. I'd be very wary of doing that with his injury situation and with where the Nets are at in their timeline. What's your point on that?
Well, a couple of things. Have they already told him that, listen, if just do the right thing, we're going to do the best that we can to get you a team, we'll get you to a contending team. We just need you to play well, say the right thing. So that maybe that conversation took place. I think more likely is that Sean Marks has a trade in his mind. I need to get this kind of player, and I need to get this many picks, or 2 players and 1 pick. I think he probably already has an idea, because I think all those teams that you mentioned, because, on my radio show in the morning on Sirius that I do with Brian Scalabrine, I've been telling him for 6 weeks about Michael Porter Jr. I kept saying, I'm telling you, there are teams in the East like Miami, like Detroit. He can make a huge difference for those teams. And it's interesting, a lot of the talk around the Warriors kind of heated up after they were here last week in Brooklyn. And obviously Jonathan Kuminga never plays. Kuminga's not playing because they're going to trade him. They obviously don't want him to get hurt. In fact, that night against the Nets, what they play 13 guys, the one guy that didn't play was Jonathan Kuminga in that game.
And Kuminga keeps getting floated in these trade packages with the Nets, despite it seems like the Nets screaming from the mountaintops, we're not interested in Kuminga. So unless he's a salary filler, he could be a salary filler, but the Nets don't have interest in him. So that's a roadblock to that deal.
I just think if the right deal comes along, I think they would do it. I think what helps the Brooklyn Nets is there's a lot of teams in the league, especially now. You look at Oklahoma City, still the class of the NBA, but they've lost a bunch of games here. They're not going to win 74 games like maybe some of us thought. They just lost to the Hornets by 27 points. So maybe it feels a little bit more wide open, certainly in the East. And he is, no matter how you cut it, the guy's a proven commodity. And we all thought, a lot of us thought, including myself, well, maybe it was just a byproduct of playing with Nikola Jokic. And that certainly helped. But you see him in like a different role in the way that he's played. That's why I think it was your question to David Adelman on that Sunday game against Denver when you asked about like a different roles. And I love David Adelman's answer was that, well, I think if you win a championship, whatever role anybody had was the perfect role for them. But I think it's kind of true, though. So now we've already seen him in two different roles where he can carry the scoring burden. He could average, 25 plus points, but we also know is like a third and a fourth option. And I think if he does end up getting traded, I think he'll be a big time addition for a team because he's big. It's hard to block his shot. He's a tough shot maker. You mentioned before that, every once in a while he's going to take a bad shot. But you know what? When you're the primary scorer, sometimes that's going to happen. Sometimes you're getting the ball late in the clock. It's not like he's Cam Thomas and he dribbles himself into his position where he purposely wants to take a bad shot. It's going to happen. But I think Sean Marks probably has, for lack of a better word, a number out there that he's thinking of when it comes to a trade for Michael Porter Jr.
Yeah, and I just, last thing on him, I just think that there's a couple of destinations that could be really interesting for both him, the Nets, and the team that's trading for him. Like I look at Detroit and I look at Milwaukee, two teams that are extremely reliant on their top guy. Like Cade Cunningham is doing so much for them offensively. Obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo is does everything for the Bucks. And there's a conversation when you talk to people around the league of like MPJ is doing all this great stuff, but he's in this number one role that he's not going to be on teams that are trading for him. So how much of this stuff really plays when he goes into that role? And I've said, you look at the role that he had in Denver, you look at the role that he has with the Nets now, I think that there's a happy medium where maybe he's not the third or fourth guy, but he's like the second guy. And I think that, in Detroit and in Milwaukee, that those are really interesting situations because you can find that middle ground. And especially with the Nets, that Bucks team, I'm sure you've talked about it ad nauseum. They're desperate as all hell to do anything they can to compete and keep Giannis Antetokounmpo there. And if I'm the Nets and I can get a future Milwaukee pick, maybe unprotected, for Michael Porter Jr., you get that and you get the future Denver unprotected. That could be the basis of a really good trade package for whatever star maybe you want to go after down the line. So that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I want to talk about tanking, because tanking, this is now my last two of my 4 seasons on the Nets beat. I've been covering a tanking team, and it's been interesting to say the least, that experience. But, tanking, to me, it's a big problem. It's one of the biggest problems in the NBA, I think, because the product in March and April, I think, is just brutal. And you see that with a lot of teams. And they've tried to, take some measures to address it with flattening the lottery odds and all that. But before we get into that, what is your viewpoint on taking? Like, how big of a problem do you think it is for the NBA?
I think it's huge. I think you can incentivize losing, and it's the one sports league that does that. Not even in the NFL are they really incentivized to lose. I get it late in the season. Teams may do things like hold players out, but you can't. There's limited players on the roster. Plus, it's a physical sport, so it doesn't really happen. The only sport it really happens in is the NBA, and you got to get away from that. Since there's nothing like relegation like they have in the European leagues, they have to come up with some kind of formula to prevent the teams from tanking. I'd be all for that. I think the league should be aggressively pursuing ways to do that.
Yeah, and they kind of took like a half measure, like they flattened the lottery odds, and that has resulted in a lot of these other teams, jumping in the lottery. And that was implemented obviously to try to dissuade tanking. And I don't really think it's done that. If anything, I think it can incentivize some teams who could go for the play-in to try to go for the lottery because they say, hey, we have a better chance of jumping up there. And you look at the whole idea of the draft lottery was for some of these small market teams, some of these bad teams, to give them a pathway to get elite top tier talent. And can it still do that? It can, but it's harder now because you look at the last few drafts, you spoke about it earlier, some of the rich teams are getting richer and some of the small market teams are getting screwed. And this isn't even as much of a detriment to the Nets because they're a team in New York. They're always going to be in the conversation for some of these star guys. But you look at the Spurs jumping up and getting Wemby, the 76ers, DJ Edgecombe, obviously the Mavericks jumping up to get Cooper Flagg, whatever other drafts you want to talk about. And these teams like Utah, the Wizards, whatever small market team, Charlotte, they got a good player in this past draft, but those teams falling back and those teams outside of the draft, free agency's dead. no top trade guy is requesting a trade to the Wizards or the Jazz or the Hornets. So those teams really get screwed. So I think that the flattening of the lottery odds, I think, has been a detriment, and it's been counterproductive, in my opinion.
Yeah. So what I've always felt the solution would be, so after this year's draft, because you can't change it now, you have 5 pods of 6 teams, 3 from the East, 3 in the West in each pod. You then, before the season, right after the draft, you decide where in the lottery they're going to pick, either 1 through 6, 7 through 12, so on and so on. So you go into the next season knowing where you're going to pick generally, either 1 through 6 or 7 through 12, so on and so on. And then every 5 years, a team is guaranteed to get the number one, guaranteed to get a top 6. So I think that would work, because if you get picks 1 through 6, then obviously that's to rotate. Then you probably get the last 6 picks the next year, and you could still do the lottery. After the year, you could do the lottery picks 1 through 30.
So before the season, if you're saying the whole league knows before the season, or just the lottery?
Yes, the whole league knows that what area of the draft they're picking in.
Before the
1
season
through 6,
starts.
7 through 12, so on and so on. So now there's no incentive to tank. You should be trying to win.
Do you think do you think some of the small market teams would continue to get screwed? Or you're saying it rotates
tough luck.
where it evens?
Tough luck. Everyone, you know you're not, because you still, every 5 years you're going to get a chance to get the number 1 pick. Or every 5 years you're going to be in the top 6. Why should you? First of all, it doesn't work anyway, because how many playoff series have the Wizards won? It seems like they're in the lottery all the time. Utah's been in the lottery for how many straight years?
Yeah, but these last few years, I think that the flattening of the lottery odds has really hurt them. But I do think that, I understand what you're saying, and I do think that could be an interesting way of it just rotates and it's going to even out over time. Like, that's one way to do that. Another solution that I've seen floated by some people is after the All-Star break, you flip it, and towards the lottery, instead of losses, you count wins. So it gets a lot more competitive during the second half of the season. And I would really be a fan of that, because you guarantee important basketball in the second half of the season. And when you approach the trade deadline, you'll have some teams who are, non-playoff teams. They could turn into buyers at the trade deadline to try to be good in the second half of the year.
Or how about at the end of the year, it's your record. If you were a bottom, let's say 5 team, which you can't make it the like 9 or 10, but if you're like a bottom 4 or 5 team, maybe it's what your record is against the top, say, 6 teams in your conference, or maybe even the top 6 teams in the league. Maybe you should get rewarded that you had a better record against the teams that finished with the 6th best record in both conferences. So something like that.
I think the bottom line with all of it is it's what you said at the top, which is a great point, is you can't incentivize losing like this. You need to find a change to flip it where you incentivize winning. And whether that's, you said, where, people know where they're going to pick before the season because there is no incentive to losing then, or you look at it and you say that after the All-Star break, wins count instead of losses, or what you just floated as the last example. All of these things are things that could incentivize winning. And sure, there's give and take, and there's trade-offs with any of these things. But I think we can all agree that the way that it's going now and the level of basketball that you get from some teams through the whole season, and especially for March and April, it's a disservice to the fans and people who are paying to watch this stuff. And
100%, because the fans you're still paying a full ticket price, and sometimes the star players are being held out. But think about it this way: let's say going into the last week of the season, hypothetically, the Nets have the best record among lottery teams against the top 6 teams in both conferences. So let's say, hypothetically again, they're playing the Knicks on the second to last day of the season. And maybe the Knicks are thinking, we don't want the Nets to get the number 1 pick, but we're trying to rest for the playoffs. But the heck with this. We don't want the Nets, they're getting better. We don't want them to get a pick. So we're going to try to beat them. And then you have the Nets trying to win, because that helps them against teams with the better record. They just have to come up with something where teams are trying to win. The best example of it is, when you look at, say, for example, the Premier League in soccer in England, if you're 18, 19, or 20, you get dropped to the second level. You don't stay in the league, which means less money. The teams that stay above that line, the team that finishes 17th, and if they finish 17th on the final day of the season, let's say they needed a win to finish 17th, There have been occasions where the fans have run on the field, finishing in 17th place, because that means they stay above, because there's such a severe penalty in terms of stature, in terms of money. Losing here in the NBA, we're telling you lose, keep losing, increase your odds of getting the best player that could be entering the draft.
Yeah, so hopefully they find a way to change that. And there have been some discussions about that, but it does have to pass through all the owners in the league. So
yeah,
we'll see how that plays out in the NBA. Got a few more things we want to talk about. One against Egor Demin, his start to the season, and then also Cam Thomas. What is going on with him? What do we think of how this has played out since he's returned from injury? So we'll get into all that when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, during basketball season, there's nothing like being in the building, the energy, the crowd, that first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments, not stuck refreshing screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. That's where GameTime comes in. The GameTime app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets, fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Browsing the GameTime app is straightforward and intuitive. Finding tickets takes just a few taps. Seeing the view from your seat before buying makes choosing tickets easy and confident. Prices include fees up front, so the total is clear from the start, and features like zone deals help unlock great seats at even better value. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the GameTime app today and get in on the action. All right, coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode with Frank Isola. And Frank, want to quickly hit on Egor Demin because he is the Nets' first lottery pick in 15 years. He has entered the starting lineup and looked pretty good, over these last, I think 25 games that he's played as a starter. He's at 11.3 points, 3.4 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 2.0 turnovers, 40, 38, 91 shooting splits. And he's become a really high-level three-point shooter, shooting over 38% on 12 attempts per 100 possessions, so really high volume. And it's really been nothing like what the scouting report was about him coming out of BYU, which was he's this pick-and-roll savant, this live dribble playmaker, all this stuff. The three-point shooting is a little bit of a concern, and it's flipped. He doesn't really do that much of anything in the pick and roll, and he's just been this elite three-point shooter. So it's been a weird thing for some people to wrap their head around, but I've been pretty encouraged because I think with the size, with what he's been able to show defensively, the three-point shooting, and some of that playmaking that you can hopefully unlock, I think there's the makings of a very productive player there.
Yeah, I think, first of all, he looks and acts like he belongs. So the confidence level is there. It seems like he's responds pretty well to coaching when Jordy has gotten on him a little bit. It's never over the top criticism, but I think he's always pushing him and wants more. The three-point shooting has surprised me a little bit. You'd like to see him diversify his game a lot more. I think that'll come over time. I think when you look at his body, just look at, except for Kevin Durant, he'd be the one outlier. But a lot of the guys, you look at them when they first come into the league, and you're like, wow, look at the guy's body type. Then you see him 3-4 years down the road and how much different they've changed. Go look at Steph Curry when he came into the league and where he is right now. So I think all of that, the strength, the physical nature of the game, that'll come. But I think he looks like he belongs. Al McGuire always had that great quote, the famous broadcaster, the New York coach, where he said, the best thing about freshmen is that they become sophomores. I think that's the best thing about guys like Egor Demin. The best thing about him is he's going to become a much more experienced player. I think with him, I think they have to be over the moon with the way that he played. Is VJ Edgecombe better at this stage? Absolutely. But you just look at the physical tools that Egor has. He's got, good size, good length. I think over time, becoming a better rebounder will be important, becoming a better defender. I think early on, it looks like they've hit on that one. I think they made a pretty good selection.
Yeah, and a big part of the evaluation there for the Nets was that, during the draft process, from things I've heard from people, is just the guy's a fanatical worker, and he just has the right attitude. And when you have a guy that is 6'9", has the ball handling ability that he does have at that size, the shooting, the measurables, and you have a mindset where you're very confident that he's going to do all that he can to maximize that skill set. And a big part of that's going to be bulking up, a huge part of that. That, I think that can, as a GM, you can rest your head on the pillow at night and sleep well when you know you have a guy like that. Last thing I want to close it out on is Cam Thomas, because Cam Thomas has been a huge talking point surrounding the Nets and this fan base for the last 5 years now, or 4.5 years now. And it looks like, in my opinion, it's coming to a close. But we kind of had a weird situation in this last game, and we talked about it on the post game where, he had these comments after the Houston loss where he was asked about coming off the bench. They had a lot of rookies starting over him. The starters got crushed in their minutes. He got asked whether that was frustrating, and he said no comment, kind of like with this smile on his face. And then I asked Jordi Fernandez about his performance in that game where he scored a lot, but it was kind of more of the same in terms of the defense and the playmaking. Jordi said, once again, the scoring's great, but I need more defense and playmaking. And then in the next game, Cam had a game where I thought in the first half he looked completely just like he wasn't in it whatsoever. Like he was getting doubled and whatever, sure, but like you see it in other games when he gets doubled and he passed the ball, he's sprinting to find another place to get the ball back. And it just he wasn't involved at all. It looked like he was out of it. And I was marking that down during that half going, oh, like, is this going to reach a boiling point like right here? And then in the second half, he comes out and it's a complete 180 and he's trying to score every time he gets the ball. And he goes from no points on one shot to 17 points on 9 shots in the second half. So what's your opinion about that whole situation? And where do you think that's heading in that last performance? Because it's a weird situation at this point.
It is. And I use the bad pun that he doesn't have a good leg to stand on. And that's what it all goes back to is the hamstring injury where he played 25 games last season. And this year he's already missed 2 months because of a hamstring injury. So he comes back and he probably doesn't like the fact that he's on a minutes restriction. He probably doesn't like the fact that he's not starting because even if a guy's on a minutes restriction, you could still start him. And I think when you didn't have 3 starters in that game, that was the Houston game, correct? And he's going up against Kevin Durant, which, he had Kevin Durant as a teammate. He looks at him as a mentor. And you have 2 rookies starting over him. I think that probably bothered him a little bit, or maybe I should say a lot. I think you're 100% right. The game against Denver, there was one possession he just stood in the corner with his hands on his hips. The whole thing looked bad. And you mentioned something must happen at halftime. Maybe they told him to be more aggressive, or he said, the heck with it, I'm going to be more aggressive. But those 9 shots and the 17 points you talked about, he was still a -1 in that second half. I just think that the way the Nets are going under Jordi Fernandez and what they're trying to build, it doesn't look like Cam Thomas really wants to be part of it. I think he makes it a little too much about himself. And I think I understand what he could do. And there's going to be games like he had against Minnesota, the 30 points in 20 minutes. But to me, it just doesn't seem like he's with the program or that he wants to be with the program. Then Kevin Durant comes out and says after the use, well, it'd be good if somebody had confidence in him to give him, put the ball in his hands. He's a scorer. All right, that's all well and good. Again, he was hurt for all but 25 games last season. And he's already been hurt this year. So what are you saying that a team should just here are the keys to the offense. You go do whatever you want. I don't know if we could rely on you because you don't play any defense and you're hurt a lot. So I thought he handled it really poorly. I think sometimes the players, if their agents are giving them advice, they're not listening. Why are you coming to a press conference and answering the questions in that manner? Because if he's not going to be on the Nets, how do you think other teams are viewing that when they watch that? Or no comment. And you're all ticked off. You're barely available to play. And now all of a sudden you're available and you think you should be starting, you should be playing big minutes. They're trying to gradually work you along. So I don't think these last 2 games for him on and off the court, like at the press conference and then on the court, I don't think it's been good for him.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting, like I was questioning for a while on this podcast while Cam was out and the Nets completely turned it around, whether they were even going to bring him back.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah, because you look at it and they had all of these guys playing well, like all these rookies who they're trying to get minutes to. For a guy who it doesn't seem like he's part of the long-term future at all, like to me, it didn't really make that much sense to bring him back. All he's going to do is take touches away from some other guys. And also, it could be a distraction. And like, yeah, the no comment answer, like I get him being frustrated with coming off the bench and all those things. And like, do I think that he's more talented than a lot of those guys who were starting? Sure. But the injury thing is what you said about it. And to me, like a lot of fans are going to disagree with me about this, but just like the way that he answered that, like you could just as well say, like, I'm going to do whatever the coaches are asking of me. Like we have a plan for this, like whatever, just instead of it becoming a thing, it becomes a thing because you give an answer like that. And I think a great juxtaposition is I asked Day'Ron Sharpe after the last game where Day'Ron Sharpe dominated, and he's in the same draft class as Cam Thomas. He's been in the same boat. He's, been a guy who I think has exceeded expectations. He's been really productive. And despite coming off a career best season last year, he's playing this season. He's playing less this season than he did last year. And I asked him about that. And what has his mindset been? And he said, look, like I'm grateful for any opportunity I get. I'm going to dominate when I get the minutes. He made sure to throw in, like, I think I can play with the best centers in the NBA. And I've showed that. But in the opportunity I do get, I'm going to make the most of it. And it's just like, it's such a stark contrast between the way those two guys in somewhat similar situations have approached it. It couldn't be more different in my opinion.
No, yeah, we talked about that on the post game show, and I also think, when I talk to coaches around the league, head coaches, assistant coaches, they'll talk about Daron Sharp, and it'll all be positive. When Cam Thomas's name comes up, they all know that he's a talented scorer, but it's not kind of that same feeling. They all feel like it has to be a specific situation in a good role. If he's playing well, I think he's a guy that comes off the bench for the most part, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Jamal Crawford made a pretty good career out of that, as did Lou Williams. I mean, Manu Ginobili came off the bench a bunch for the San Antonio Spurs when they won championships. But I think it all goes back to the summer. The contract offer that he received, he decided to, as they love to say, bet on himself, and he took that 1 year qualifying offer. He'll be an unrestricted free agent, but I don't know. I mean, we're all the teams lining up to sign him during the offseason. They could have made him an offer. They decided not to do that. So we'll see what happens. But I think he needs to do a better job understanding like how he's viewed around the league. And when he was asked that question about playing time, he easily could have said, the playing time will come. I'd been out for a while. I'm happy with the minutes that I got. I'm ready to play more whenever they are. Something along those lines. He just, by saying no comment, it spoke volumes.
Yeah, and I just think, last thing, closing it out, like, I think to be any kind of professional athlete or, in any profession, like, you need a certain level of self-awareness. Yeah. And I just think Cam has like the ultimate utmost confidence in himself, which is a big asset for him and a big reason why he can be a very good player. But at the same time, like, you have people, coaches, past Nets coaches, Steve Nash, Jock Vaughn, people around the NBA analysts telling you, like, yes, you're a great scorer. You need to try harder on defense. You need to readjust how you approach playmaking and kind of, shift your mindset. And I asked him about it before the season. You didn't get this contract. Is there going to be any adjustment in the way that you approach the game, the way you view things in order to get that contract? And he said, no, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. And that could be, honestly, like, that could be Cam Thomas's detriment in the long term. I think he'll still have a role in the NBA, but if he wants the role that he wants, and it's going to be a starter role and a big money role, he's going to have to shift the mindset. I don't think that will happen with the Nets. Could another team get their hands on him and maybe get through to him more? We'll see. But Frank, appreciate you taking the time. If you guys don't, check out Frank's show on SiriusXM with Brian Scalabrine. Also, you can catch him on the halftime and post-game show, Frank. But appreciate it and hope to have you back on at some point in the future.
Thanks, Eric. Keep up the good work.
That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Frank. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you could do to engage is much appreciated. But the Nets are going to be back in action on Wednesday at Barclays Center. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.